My name is Donald Antrim. I'm the author of One Friday in April, a story of suicide and survival. Wrote a memoir of my mother's life and mine, the two of us together. She was a terrible alcoholic and had a very difficult life. And when she died, I began writing about her. I'd never anticipated that I would. I felt tremendous anxiety during the course of writing. Within weeks after turning in the manuscript, I began to deteriorate. I went into a higher, and higher anxiety state. And over the course of a number of months, got worse and worse in my apartment. I had a girlfriend then named Reagan, and she helped take care of me, but she became exhausted as well. I wasn't sleeping. I was smoking cigarettes all the time. I thought my heart was going to explode. I got a feeling of sickness in my body. I couldn't really walk a straight line. After a fight with Reagan, I ran up onto the roof of my building and climbed down the fire escape and hung there with a toe hold and just leaned out and hung there by my hands, my left hand and then my right hand, thinking that I would let go and fall into the concrete patio down below at the back of the first floor apartment. After 5 hours, I came back down from the roof. I knew at the time that I would be a long time in recovery if I ever recovered, and I had a terrible dread of the hospital, and I knew that I would be going there. And sure enough, when I got down to the apartment, my friends put me into a car and whisked me off to the hospital, where I spent only the weekend before talking myself out. It was a good 5 weeks before I took myself up to Columbia to go to Presbyterian, where I spent 3.5 months, close to 4 months in treatment. I got through it by going to the hospital, I think, um, and staying. I had an 8 week drug trial with an old antidepressant called nortriptyline, which didn't work. So I sat in the hospital getting worse. At a certain point, after 2 months had gone by, I had a meeting with my doctors, and there was a woman there who was the head of ECT. Now, ECT terrified me, and I was afraid that it would come to that. I thought that I would be scrambled up. I thought that I would never work again, even though I hadn't been working. I thought that I wouldn't be able to think again. And I felt desperate about this. And I wept and wept and wept. And I did not give my consent at that point. I got a phone call on the ward from the writer David Foster Wallace, who had been referred by a mutual friend and who asked me as soon as I picked up the phone, "How are you? How long have you been there?" And then he said, "Have you been offered ECT?" And I said, "Yes, it just happened." And he said, "If they offer you ECT, then I want you to do it. You'll be okay. You won't be destroyed by it." He told me that he'd had it 20 years before in Indiana and that it had got much better and much more refined in the intervening years. And that was what did it for me. I went ahead and gave my approval, and we began ECT. And over the course of 18 treatments, I got better. It was miraculous. Well, I learned a very high regard for doctors and nurses and for hospitals. I learned that we depend on each other and that we don't do anything alone. I learned that I'd been very, very sick and that I was lucky to recover. I learned that I would one day write about this experience, and it took me a very long time to do that. That's what this book is. I learned more about patience. It took a long time in both cases to get better. I suppose the advice I would give would be try not to be afraid of the hospital. And if you're as sick as I was, to get there. It's a sanctuary as well as a place of treatment. When I first went to the hospital, when I first went in for the long stay, I still felt terrified of it, but I also felt a kind of calm, or I felt a little bit of a relief because I couldn't die very easily in the hospital. I could give up on that fear a little bit. I remained very sick, but I was less afraid of suicide. So my advice would be to seek treatment and to rely on your friends as well, or family if it's possible. And that's one of the reasons that I wrote this book, was to pass on what David Wallace did for me, and just to say, seek treatment if you need to. Don't delay.